Centercity.church.
You already know.
You did so well.
Thanks.
It's probably all of the aftershock of the anointing from Sunday, the residual effect of the anointing that is still pouring from you.
That or just exhaustion.
That too.
It's okay. I got a good Sunday afternoon nap.
Well, there's nothing like good Sunday afternoon nap. 2022.
I'm still saying 2020. I have to check myself.
There are so many twos in this year. It's funny because I did the same thing this afternoon. I was this morning redoing some files on my computer, and I labeled a folder 2020. It's gonna take a little while.
It is gonna take a little while.
But already, one day in, it's been a pretty good year so far.
Yeah, we're 3 whole days in.
3 whole days in. That goes to show you.
Yeah, just flying.
It's just happening. So this Sunday, you spoke a little bit about prayer. Not a little bit. You spoke a lot about prayer, and we really kind of set the tone. It very well could be a new kind of tradition for us.
Yeah, I love that.
Decided the first Sunday of the year to really focus in on the heart of God through prayer. And you did a great job talking about scary, big prayers. So I want to kind of first start by asking you to just, if you can, as quickly as you can, sum up the story of Elijah. Because I think a lot of people are kind of familiar, but maybe not too familiar with the story of Elijah that you talked through Sunday to kind of set up our conversation around prayer.
Yeah, well, the main story we focused on was that Elijah was staying during a drought with this widow and her son, and while he was staying with them, they should have run out of food. They had a little oil and a little flour, but it just never ran out as long as they needed the food. And yet at the end of all of that miraculous provision, this son of this widow that he's been living with gets sick and dies. So Elijah cries out to God in confusion about why he would save him for this long and then just let him die, and then prays that the Lord would raise him from the dead, and then the Lord does.
So I thought it was fascinating that you didn't skip to the end. You spent a significant time talking through how to pray prayers of faith in seasons of disappointment.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about that. Does that come just from your study, or I kind of sensed a little bit of Ashley speaking from experience this Sunday?
Well, both. I've been studying Elijah for probably 3 or 4 months now, so it definitely is just something the Lord's been showing me over time. But I feel like, I know we don't even talk about COVID that much from this stage anymore, but something about this Omicron variant and feeling like we seem to be just kind of moving through and getting used to at least how to navigate COVID. And then it's like all of a sudden it's the worst it's ever been. And that can be a little bit deflating and almost feel a little bit like, okay, God, for 2 years we've been doing this and you've been sustaining us. And then all of a sudden there were a couple of days there where I felt like everyone I knew was calling me and saying, I'm in quarantine, I'm in isolation. And thankfully no one is super, super sick. I know there are some people who are struggling on a whole different level, but it just kind of feels like we're in a season like that where I don't understand why this is still going on.
So we've kind of seen 2 or 3 different responses to this specific issue of COVID, but I think it applies in a lot of people's seasons of disappointment. Option number 1 is to kind of live in the depth of the disappointment, allow it to affect your every waking moment, and there's always despair, and everything's about the latest news headline, and running through numbers and kind of walking out on the other side, no matter what the numbers say, just with more disappointment. We tend to collect disappointment, some of us.
Yeah.
And then there's the other extreme where it's just ignore it. Like, we're not going to do anything or say anything and pretend like it's not here. And those 2 extremes really doesn't resolve. And I think for a lot of people who maybe it's not COVID, maybe it's issues of relationship, maybe it's issues of finance, maybe it's issues of marriage. And again, they're either pretending it's not there or they're just allowing the disappointment to pile on. What advice would you give? Kind of how do we navigate to a place that we're able to pray these scary big prayers in these seasons of disappointment without being ignorant of what's happening and also with not allowing it to weigh us down?
I think the biggest point that I took away from just putting this message together is that Elijah was honest with God about his disappointment. And so when we try to hide it, it's just kind of under the surface all the time, impacting our whole lives. And then when we try to wallow in it, a lot of times we're not taking it to God, we're taking it everywhere else and just thinking about it all the time. But there's something about just being real with God and crying out to the Lord, saying that you don't understand. He knows that anyway. Like, you're not telling him anything that he doesn't know. And then he, in his power, he becomes our peace. It's not a lie in the Bible, this peace that passes understanding. It might not, our circumstances might not change. We might not be like Elijah and see that sun raised right away, but the Lord still works in that when we bring that disappointment to him. And I think sometimes we're afraid to do that.
Yeah, and then we see Elijah go from disappointment and frustration right to this audacious prayer.
Mm-hmm.
So kind of, would you define what a scary big prayer is and what it kind of sounds like?
What, like in general, what is
Yeah.
scary? I would say, as I think in my own life, it's something that you can't accomplish on your own. So asking God to do something that has to be supernaturally impacted and doing it with confidence that you know that he can. There's a story that we didn't talk about, but that I think about a lot that actually also involves someone being raised from the dead, but a father who comes to Jesus and asks for, I think it's his daughter or son, who has died to be raised to dead and raised to life, not raised to dead. And Jesus, kind of asks him if he believes, and his answer is, I do believe, help me in my unbelief. So if you're in a place where that's a hard prayer to pray with confidence, even that is something we can ask the Lord for more confidence and faith in him. But yeah, just taking something that we wouldn't be able to do on our own that has to be done by God, God-sized, and just going for it.
Yeah, I think I was challenged Sunday with this idea of praying the type of prayers that bring dead things to life.
Mm-hmm.
Just because even in that story with the young girl, there's just this moment. You even see it in when Jesus raises Lazarus from the dead. There's this moment where people are quick to try to bury things, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's human nature, right? Like, that's just a part of us. Like, we want to move on. We want to kind of just put it behind us. And I also just learned in life that people around me, even growing up, just the wrong people have a tendency of wanting to bury things that are not even fully dead. They just walk instantly into, all right, well, let's just bury it. But to pray audacious prayers is really being able to tell the mourning to stop. You can't pray audacious prayers when there's skepticism and doubt and worry and frustration. And not that there's not some of that naturally there, but there's got to be a point in us that we're willing to stop the noise and really speak to dead things and watch them come alive.
One of the things I didn't even get into on Sunday, because you can never get into everything you want to, is that Elijah prayed that 3 times.
Yeah.
If he had stopped after the first time or stopped after the second time, who knows what would have happened. But he continued to persist in that prayer, which I think is also something we need to learn, that we might pray something really big one time and then nothing changes and we're like, oh, well, I guess that wasn't the right prayer, and instead we're supposed to persist and keep asking.
I've always liked the phrase work in prayer, the work of prayer, because right, everything else seems to be activity, but really the work is done in prayer. And that requires persistence. It requires, faithfulness and kind of putting your nose down and doing what you know that God's calling you to do, despite what's kind of happening around us. So that kind of leads to a nice transition as people start their year. We'll be doing a 21-day of focus starting on the 10th, which will
21-day of prayer.
Focus, yeah. Well, it's kind of the same thing.
Yeah, focus prayer.
That's right. So 21 days of prayer, which we'll get into some more detail here in the next couple of days. We're really excited about that. It'll be January 10th. But for a lot of people who maybe walked away Sunday inspired by the message, inspired by our experience where we were praying collectively as a community, even this week, what are some of the things that you might suggest that they do to bring that prayer lifestyle home with them?
The first thing I would say is find someone to do it with you. The faster you find those 1 or 2 people that you're comfortable sharing what your scary big prayer is, who will pray alongside you, but also ask you how that's going and encourage you in your prayer, you're just so much more likely to keep doing it because God created us to do this together. And then the second would just be really simply set a reminder in your phone. Like, just do some things that are going to help you make sure you're setting aside that time to pray every day. And that might be a reminder. It might be getting a new prayer journal and having that to go through and just record these prayers that you're praying to the Lord. But definitely start by letting some people in with you.
Yeah, that's great advice. I find that when I commit to pray for other people, I'm more likely to pray than just to pray for myself. So getting people involved, asking what their scary big prayer is, helping them in their journey. And then collectively, when God shows up, we get to see the kind of miraculous faithfulness of God show up in multiple people. And it's just amazing, which to some degree we'll be talking a little bit about Sunday, which I'm really excited.
Yeah, I'm excited too. Are we going to share where we're going?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So this Sunday we start our Generation series, which will be kind of the theme for the year. Just believing that God has a blessing for Abraham, Jacob, and Isaac. And that idea that God desires to bless all generation. Like when he defined himself often in scripture, he's the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And it's just a powerful picture of not just what we are as a church, because I do think that a church that is a church of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, where everybody's validated and everybody understands their purpose and understands that there's life to be found in Jesus, and all of that communicated in a way that they understand that's relevant and speaks to their season. But also a church that collectively to the community is a place where young people are finding their footing, and not only finding Jesus, and not just a church that ministers to young people, but a church that allows young people to step in to that purpose and minister themselves. And for those young adults, those millennials, those Gen Zs, whatever you want to call it, whatever age demographic, there's just a place and purpose. And when that is the look and feel of the church, I think the world around us sees God in the middle of that all. But what I'm really excited is what this means for homes and what this means for families. Really, the hope is that in the next several months, dads are inspired like never before, and moms are inspired like never before, and sons and daughters are inspired like never before to really just step fully into the journey that the Lord's paved for them, with consideration that what you do today affects your lineage for years to come. I'm really believing that God will change family trees.
Wow.
There's a lot of family trees that have been grown in seasons of corrosion and brokenness. And people in the room might even think, well, because my dad's marriage, or because my mom's lifestyle, or because my history says, and we're very much in love with that as a culture. I believe that I'm just really believing that as your kids and your kids' kids and your kids' kids' kids come back to the moment that family changed, it'll come back to a small gathering of people in Charlotte, North Carolina, that really just went after God with all we had and watched him change family trees. So I'm incredibly excited.
Yeah, me too. It's going to be a good series. It's going to be awesome.
Absolutely. So couple things, just make sure you tune in Sundays, 10 a.m., same time. We would love to have you here, following all, as much as we can. And you can follow us all online. Then the 21 Days of Prayer, which starts January 10th. You can follow all our socials to figure that all out. Again, we'll be letting that information get out as we get closer to Sunday. We're really going to step into a season of focused prayer. There'll be some fasting. I'll explain that all too. Fasting is the scary word that throws everybody off. We'll actually talk a little bit about that next week in the podcast. But just believing God to show up in a big way through our 21-day focus. And it's a really good time to set new patterns, and 21 days allows us to do that.
Awesome. I'm excited.
I'm excited too. We hope to see you Sunday.
Yeah, have a great week.